Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. We'll wait a few more minutes for a few more people to file in. And thank you so much for coming. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today for a meeting of collaboration, of education, of learning from other places that face some of the same challenges that we do, and of coming together with some solutions. This is the first of one of our open format webinars that we have based in education and for these purposes. So we do encourage involvement in a few different ways. We're going to go through a series of videos and a chat about a few different lakes that you may have seen on the invite and relate some of that to the Salton Sea, and then have a discussion about some of the things that have happened in those places that we may be able to implement at the Salton Sea, and some other tactics that we may not have thought of yet to support restoration and initiatives. I'm going to share a little bit about our organization, is the EcoMedia Compass. So we have been supporting Salton Sea restoration initiatives since 2011 at the Salton Sea. We have a few different main campaigns. We've been supporting water sustainability in the region for many years, knowing that water is a tool, and if we have enough, we can do whatever we would like with that amount of water. We have also been supportive in leading an effort for supporting restoration in the canal community of Desert Shores with a number of other different organizations and the local community groups. And then we also have a project in planning called Pelican Oasis to help support restoration at the state park. And that's a newer project that we're working on. Over the years, we have held probably close to 100 community events around education, awareness, supporting restoration, giving locals and people from afar education tools that they can use to help advocate for restoration efforts. We do have also science on the ground, especially in Desert Shores, and a number of our team members are supportive in other areas as far as water quality and other restoration initiatives. And we're grateful to be able to work with the community in this way, in a place that means a lot to each of us who show up and work on these things together. My name is Kerry Morrison. I am the founder of the organization. We have a great board of directors as well. Looks like we have a couple of them here. Mr. Tom Sefton, Jasmine Phillips, thank you so much for also being available to join us today. And we do want to encourage collaboration. So this, like I said, this is a newer format. And so if there is something that you would like to comment on, you would like to bring up and share, we'll give each person about 1 to 2 minutes to share that concept. And then if that is something that is going to be answered soon by the presentation, we can hold that for a little bit later, or we may be able to develop a conversation around that. We're going to go through some video material of 5 different lakes, including the Salton Sea, to learn a little bit more about the background. And then we'll have a collaborative discussion after that. And ultimately, this is for inspiration and tools. And thank you for joining us in our first of this workshop, this kind of workshop about Salton Sea restoration. We see some familiar faces out there, and just glad that you can join us. And if you would like to speak, please do raise your hand, and we'll invite you to speak when that makes most sense. You are welcome to hop onto video and do so. And if you have ideas, that's what we're here for. If we all knew how to solve every aspect of the Salton Sea, it would have been done many years ago. So we're operating this as a conversation and a forum, and very open-minded to ways that we can support each other's efforts. So we're going to start with the first lake on our focus, and this is Owen's Lake. Has anyone heard of Owen's Lake? Can we get any hands raised out there? All right, well, I'm sure some of you have. We're going to go into a bit of video. Let me know if you cannot hear video on this. For some reason, if you can't hear any sound. The sound for this particular clip is a bit windy. It's a windy place, so keep that in mind, but we have a format that we'll go through. And here we go. We're going to start with Owen's Lake in Central California. So the reason we chose Owen's Lake as a point for discussion is it has a lot of parallels with the Salton Sea. Owen's Lake was about 1/3 the size of Salton Sea. Its water was reallocated to Los Angeles, and it wiped out the ecosystem, and it caused some of the worst dust storms in North America for quite some time. So I'm going to share a clip of what it looks like at this time. So you may see some familiar looking mountains. This looks a lot like Salton Sea. It's a giant dry basin. So this is a lot what Salton Sea would look like without a lake. It is a little bit further north. It's near Mount Whitney. And something that's been particularly interesting is the way that agencies have been going about restoration. So there have been quite a few different challenges faced here, which spurred the need for this mitigation. This lake was originally 108 square miles, and ancient Owens Lake was teeming with life. Migratory birds using the Pacific Flyway found refuge there. Indigenous Paiute tribes thrived on the shores, and it was a beautiful lake, a beautiful, thriving lake. In the late 1800s, there was an influx of settlers drawn from the California gold rush that had increased human activity in some towns and industry and some boats out on the lake. And then in 1913, Los Angeles faced a water crisis, and they diverted much of the water, almost all of the water that was flowing into the lake to Los Angeles. And by the 1920s, Owens Lake was largely drained, transforming it from a vast freshwater expanse to a diminished, also saline remnant of what it was. That dramatic reduction led to several consequences. So dust storms with exposed lake beds, these became frequent, turning the region into, once again, one of the largest sources of particulate pollution in the United States, and posed severe respiratory health risk for residents. There's a loss of biodiversity, wiping out birds and fish, and the Paiute community faced major disruptions, as this was a center of their culture, life, and fishing for many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of years. In the 1970s and 1990s, there was rising awareness and legal battles. And by the late 20th century, the health and environmental hazards were undeniable. Eventually, regulatory bodies came in, and there's a Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District, which was at the forefront of holding Los Angeles Department of Water and Power accountable. The state of California stepped in to enforce some environmental and health regulations, and then other environment and advocacy groups. So the Sierra Club was a big part of this one. They were pivotal in raising awareness about issues associated with the draining of Owens Lake and the dust challenges. There's also an Owens Valley Committee, a local grassroots organization that made a huge impact there, and they've advocated for the rights of local communities. And also, once again, the Bishop Paiute tribe. So out of all of the action that was spurred by this, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power was responsible for mitigation. And in the last 15 years or so, they have spent billions and billions of dollars on mitigation. Members of our team have been there a number of times, and about 5 years ago, I haven't interviewed them since then, they had spent close to $4 billion mitigating the dust and creating some wetland habitats and putting fresh water back into it so it wouldn't blow around again. Much of that infrastructure has been wiped out since the rains. So these are all things that we can learn about. What can we take to the Salton Sea, what has worked and what isn't working. I'm going to share just a little bit of a perspective of the crews working on mitigation efforts at the Salton Sea. At Owens Lake. Can you hear the sound? Not of this. Okay, that's not absolutely necessary.
As you can see, there's not a whole lot of.
So this is a perspective on the ground. Members of our team have been here a number of times. Once again, they're spending billions and billions of dollars blowing up the mountains nearby, turning it into gravel and covering the playa with that, and then turning some of this into wetland habitat, and then some of it into hay bales like we've seen at the Salton Sea, and irrigation for certain wetland habitat features. When it rains, that can be wiped out. So we've seen this happen a couple times. This is what it looked like a few years ago, much like the Salton Sea. It's had a couple large rains since then and has wiped out much of the infrastructure. And now it looks like a large lake again. So they'll probably spend millions, hundreds of millions more to make up for what was wiped out in restoration, wiped out by automatic restoration of the rains filling the valley. So one of the main takeaways that we've had from this lake is a sustainable water source that has water rights and that can be measured and balanced, and know how to expect that. One of the biggest challenges with that is it's also a terminal lake, like the Salton Sea. In most of it, there are some streams, and obviously they were able to route the inflows to Los Angeles, but things that go into these saline lakes generally stay in the saline lakes. So at this point, would like to open this up for conversation. We have just a few minutes of conversation about each lake. Would love to hear any perspectives of things that you've seen that has worked, that hasn't worked, and anything that can be taken to the Salton Sea to support restoration. So please raise your hand if you'd like to share any conversation about Owens Lake and how that may relate to the Salton Sea. We have a guest, Nathan White. Sure, Nathan White.
I'll just say that it worked really well, that there's a lot of dust to mitigate, right? And that's kind of the issue, is that there's a lot of incentives for companies that are in the dust mitigation arena to have hundreds of millions of dollars because the problem was generated. And I see the same thing happening at the Salton Sea, where there's a lot of reasons why restoration isn't on the table and mitigation is the primary objective. And that's because there's a lot of money involved in it. And it's a lot of continuous money on a rolling basis for a select few companies that are in that space, that are kind of ready to take on that mantle here, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it too, the terminal lake ability of it, we're looking at several different lakes. Several different lakes that are in the same situation. The Great Salt Lake is also, kind of a terminal lake. All of these different
we'll hop
things.
Into the other lakes in general, yeah.
Yeah. And if the same strategies for restoration could be applied to the Salton Sea, it's kind of a mixture of the same fabric.
Definitely. Are there any aspects, Nathan, that you've noticed that have worked that we can implement at the Salton Sea from Owens? Any lessons, any main takeaways? We have Tony.
It took a second to unmute there. So the main takeaways is that preventing it is the best cost-saving measure, right? Restoration and prevention of the eventual disaster is the most cost-effective means of restoring it or mitigating it. Much less cost to maintain and operate, much less cost to the ecosystem and the economy. Specifically, the surrounding communities are no more, or shouldn't be anymore, but there's people that are like the Salton Sea that are locked into that real estate. That might have been the only property that they could ever buy. So the decimation of that is something that should be prevented from just an economic standpoint, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. Great points and great lessons from Owens Lake. We'll take one more quicker comment before hopping into the next lake. And thank you so much for your ideas and conversation here. Tony, please.
Yes, hi, Carrie. Sorry if you can hear me. I'm actually dialing in from overseas, so if I lose connectivity, it's
you sound great.
It's always been a headache. My name's Tony Valamontes. My partner and I, John Carantonis, we're two businessmen who love the concept of ESG, and
Having some trouble hearing Tony. Okay, Tony, let's hear from you a little bit later if we can.
We believe it's been used the wrong way, and leave the Salton Sea and the region, the internet.
We're having some trouble hearing you, Tony. I'm going to hop into the next lake, and we will have some more time for discussion to relate all of the lakes together. So thank you, and we hope to hear from you a little bit later. All right, we're going to hop into the next lake, is Utah's Great Salt Lake. So this is the largest on our list, even larger than Salton Sea. And let's go.
Nearly 40 years ago, Utah's Great Salt Lake covered about 3,300 square miles. Today, it has shrunk to less than 1/3 of that size.
The demand for water is outstripping the supply of water to the Great Salt Lake.
Now, what used to be a safe haven for wildlife and an industrial powerhouse for the region is a looming ecological and economic disaster in Utah and across the world.
The Great Salt Lake is an economic engine for this region.
We know too many examples around the world where terminal lakes have dried up and the outcome has not been good.
The shrinking lake might seem like a local issue, but its dwindling waters have economic consequences far beyond Utah's borders. We'll explain why. The worst-case scenario for Utah's shrinking Great Salt Lake can be seen 600 miles southwest at Owen's lake bed in California. Owen's Lake dried up decades ago, decimating the local economy and producing some of the worst levels of dust pollution in the United States, according to a 2020 study. The drying lake is also affecting an industry that is crucial to the local economy, and even your own seafood consumption. 45% of the world's brine shrimp comes from this lake, and they're used to raise fish and shrimp in aquaculture facilities around the world.
So if you go out to dinner in New York City, for example, and you get shrimp cocktail, the chances that your shrimp ate brine shrimp from the Great Salt Lake is very likely.
But as the lake water drops, its salt content increases, threatening the lake's brine shrimp.
We are at a tipping point right now with salinity levels for Great Salt Lake. As we're starting to see a decline in the brine shrimp population, we're seeing brine shrimp having a harder time reproducing. They're working so hard to shed the salt and just simply stay alive.
The world-renowned ski resorts in the mountains surrounding the Great Salt Lake are also bracing for changes. In the winter, the lake benefits nearby ski resorts by influencing the local climate and weather, producing lake-effect snowstorms. If the evaporation continues and lake-effect snow decreases, Utah's ski season could be shortened, costing the industry up to $9.6 million annually. With lower water levels comes fewer boats in the marina. Fewer boats means less revenue for recreation and tourism.
People can't recreate in their boats anymore because it's a fairly shallow lake, and so they've had to dredge in order that people can get out of the marina into the water, and that has already cost about $1.5 million.
Perhaps most alarming for the region's 1.2 million residents would be the dry lake bed sending poisonous dust into the air that millions breathe. A 2019 study from the University of Utah found that the lake bed contains arsenic and other dangerous heavy metals, much of it residue from mining activity in the region. If the lake continues to shrink, the state could spend more than $330 million on dust-containing mitigation measures over the next 20 years.
The best solution to keep dust down, it's to keep water in the lake.
So I'm going to leave it at that, wrap up a couple things and jump to where they're at today. So as you've seen, there are quite a few parallels to what we're seeing at the Salton Sea. The easiest way to keep dust down is to keep water in the lake. So we've learned that from a number of different lakes. And there's a few reasons that this has happened at the Great Salt Lake in specific. The rivers that feed the lake have faced diversions. So urbanization and agricultural expansion have reduced the inflow from the Jordan River, the Weber River, and the Bear River. Mineral extraction, vast mineral operations, while economically significant, have altered the lake's water dynamics and composition. Global warming trends have resulted in diminished snowpacks in the adjacent mountain ranges, limiting freshwater runoff. And then just a natural ebb and flow of the lake is present as well. Thousands of years ago, this was a very large, much fresher water lake. And we're getting down to a point where the climate is very different. We just don't have as much water to work with. I'm going to show where one group is working today, and this might give you some perspectives.
Along the populous Wasatch Front because of the A lawsuit was filed today to force the state of Utah to take meaningful actions to raise Great Salt Lake water levels. The Great Salt Lake is in a spiraling crisis that threatens its very existence. It provides habitat for 10 million migratory bird species, traveling from the tip of South America almost all the way to the Arctic. It is one of the most important lakes in the United States and one of the most important saline lakes in the world. The disappearance of the Great Salt Lake is also driving air quality impacts to millions of residents along the populous Wasatch Front because of the lakebed dust that gets carried in the air column when the wind blows off the dry lakebed. The state of Utah hasn't really done anything to lift Great Salt Lake water levels. It has refused to embrace new legislation being proposed by organizations like ours to raise Great Salt Lake water levels, to reduce water waste, and to give the Great Salt Lake the aquatic protection it needs to exist in the 21st century. There's been an explosion of public interest in saving the Great Salt Lake, both inside and outside Utah. And as a result of that, Utah politicians have been posturing and running propaganda campaigns to pretend like they're taking steps forward. What they're actually doing is allowing destructive water diversions to continue moving forward, which are collecting money now to start construction. Utah is decades behind other states which have implemented meaningful aquatic protection and water conservation measures now, many, many years ahead of us.
So you may notice some parallels there with the Salton Sea. I sure do. And some parallel efforts, but on kind of a different way. But we are seeing quite a few similarities there in diversions for construction. I see the Great Salt Lake as a little bit more challenging because they don't have an ocean nearby. We have an unlimited water source if we go that route. But in addition to the millions of people that are within air quality range in Salt Lake City, this was a huge hit to the Shoshone tribe, the Ute tribe, the Goshute tribes, and now there are millions of people that live along that lake. So it's a very similar air quality story that we see at the Salton Sea. This last rainy season did bring the levels up significantly, but we can't expect the biggest rain and precipitation in 40 to 100 years to happen every year. And that's what was necessary to bring it up feet. So I'd like to open up the floor for one or two brief comments. And once again, we could wrap some more things up at the end because we have a couple more lakes. But any thoughts about the Great Salt Lake and how it may relate to the Salton Sea? Please do raise your hands. See Mr. White. I'll see if anyone else raises, and if not, we'll be happy to hop to you, Nathan. I really appreciate your willingness to share. All right, I see Maddie. So we'll do Maddie and then Nathan. And go ahead, Maddie. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I guess I was just curious what the different policies or solutions that the organization proposed that were rejected, and if any of those would be applicable to the Salton Sea, as well as it seems like the biggest issue is that the water is being diverted, and if there was any benefit to thinking about like what time that water was diverted, and maybe if it was reintroduced during the fall or winter or different seasonality, if that would impact the success of retaining the water in the lake.
That's a great point. A lot of that has to do with, well, the construction industry is big. The golf courses are big. I appreciate the thought of allocating water at different times of the year, but it either goes into the lake or it gets diverted somewhere else. So there may not be an interim storage maybe there could be, and there'd be the ability to store more fresh water nearby with some construction. And that's a really, really interesting consideration. They have done quite a bit of modification of the water infrastructure by adjusting dikes, weirs, causeways that can optimize the water flow and distribution in the lake. But as far as that specific lawsuit, I don't have more information on that. But what we do see is that community groups have been coming together and having to sue because people are facing severe health concerns, millions of people. And that sounds very similar at the Salton Sea. Let's hear from Nathan.
Feel free to cut me off, but had a couple of things because I actually gave a presentation to some of the lawmakers in Utah about their water issues. Some of it is about farming. So farming is a big industry that takes a lot of water, demands a lot of water, but also construction and new housing, new high density housing, high rises and things of Salt Lake City. But a lot of the strategies, like the video mentioned, if you bring up some of the brackish well water and use saltwater tolerant landscape, that also has transevaporation. So you can use the water that's there, and everybody thinks that water is not useful because it's brackish, but there's a whole spectrum of plants and trees and sunflowers that actually extract selenium and arsenic and different things that could also help aid in the evaporation and bringing that water out of the ground and into the atmosphere. But it also does dust mitigation, which is exactly parallel to the Salton Sea, which is everybody thinks that salt water is bad, right? But salt water has a whole spectrum of things that can be used. The interesting thing that we also delivered to them just real quickly is that a restoration plan at the Salton Sea, or in our proposal, Laguna Salada, actually helps bring water into the Great Salt Lake, which is a little tangential, but nobody thinks of that as a potential solution, that this water body could actually help that water body, then that water body can help snow and rain, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how much of this is interrelated and how much these water cycles are interrelated. We'll have a quick comment from Mr. Sefton and then hop into Mono Lake, and then we will save some more time for wrapping all of these lessons and thoughts up at the end. Mr. Sefton. Thank you.
All right, now I'm unmuted. Thank you. So responding to Maddie's question, one of the issues brought up in the lawsuit is to reduce the cutoff and sustain ongoing water supply to the Great Salt Lake. Whether that's going to go anywhere versus the highly moneyed interests that are taking water for human uses remains to be seen. That's going to play out in the legal system. The management that has been done at the Great Salt Lake so far has been separating lower salinity side from the high salinity side. So the northern part of the Great Salt Lake is separated from the southern part by a causeway that was built many years ago. And on the northern side, it's highly hypersaline, and on the southern side, less so. So for a long period of time, the way this management was done was essentially to use that causeway to separate that northern side that you see at the upper end, which is highly salty and hence more discolored, almost reddish, from the southern end. And there is an opening in the middle of that causeway where there can be some mixing. That opening was recently closed so that the all of the fresher water, which mostly comes into the southern side of the Great Salt Lake, would be retained. There is where the opening has been, and you can see that it was diked off to prevent water from going across. So that's the kind of management that has been done, essentially divide the lake into two portions and keep the fresher water in the southern portion in order to prevent it from getting too hypersaline. In spite of that, the inflows are reduced so much at this point that the southern part is now at about 180 grams per liter salinity, which is right at the maximum edge of where brine shrimp can survive. And that is the basis of the ecosystem there, is those brine shrimp, and also a source of a major industry there. So the ability to manage by dividing the lake into two parts is at a point of no longer being enough.
Thank you, Tom. Fantastic understanding of some of the water management techniques that are going on there, and a good understanding of some things that could work at the Salton Sea and some things that might not. We're going to hop into Mono Lake for just a few minutes. Mono Lake is based at the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas in California. And some of you may have been there, and this is kind of a different story. We like this one because it has had some successes. So we'll share part of this video. We may not do all of these videos because we do want to leave some more time for discussion, but we'll hop to Mono Lake.
I've been coming to Mono Lake my whole life. My parents were the first state park rangers here.
Well, how was breakfast today?
It was good. Yeah, good coffee. We used to dress up for the 4th of July as I was the alkali fly, and my brother was the brine shrimp, and my mom was in the Tufa Tower costume. And so I've been involved with Mono Lake for a while.
Mono Lake's striking because the ecosystem is pretty simple.
There are trillions of brine shrimp in the lake and probably trillions of alkali flies as well along the shore.
That sounds kind of maybe not appealing, but they're really lovely and wonderful fly that hangs out on the shore, and they don't like to land on people, which is great news.
And then those things provide food for millions of migratory birds that visit Mono Lake every year.
It's a vital spot for them. If Mono Lake disappeared, they really wouldn't have the food resources they need to be able to make that journey from Canada all the way to South America.
The main work I'm doing here at Mono Lake is researching phalaropes. Phalaropes are a very small shorebird. They arrive here around the start of July. The phalaropes will swim around and twirl around in a circle to create a little vortex that brings the larva and the pupa up to the surface. They're gonna eat like crazy for several weeks, and then they're gonna fly nonstop all the way to South America from here, which is about 3,000 to 4,000 miles.
So I want to give just a little bit of a historical context of where we're at today, and you do see a good amount of life there. But in 1941, the city of Los Angeles began diverting water from that river valley as well. This significantly reduced the lake's inflow, leading to water levels dropping alarmingly. The surface area was shrunk almost in half, and its salinity doubled. So this greatly disrupted the balance of the unique and delicate ecosystem. The brine shrimp populations and the alkali fly populations were severely affected. This also threatened the Tufa Towers, which are pretty neat. We might see that a little bit more later. But there was some organization that changed the tide dramatically for Mono Lake. And in the 1980s, of which his family is a member, the Mono Lake Committee was formed in 1978. This grassroots community effort aimed to raise awareness about the lake's plight and champion its protection and restoration. This was a really small town that did this, but they got very organized. Their efforts culminated in a significant legal battle, leading to the 1994 State Water Resources Control Board Decision 1631. This mandated that LA would significantly cut down its water diversions, ensuring that Mono Lake would rise to a healthier, ecologically stable level at 6,392 feet above sea level. This set a precedent in water rights and ecological conservation in the state of California. So this is something that the Salton Sea could look to emulate in some capacity. The years following that saw more organization by local communities and scientists, and the Stream Restoration Agreement of 2010 laid out comprehensive plans for habitat restoration. We'll learn a little bit more in the video.
They form these really amazing flocks. Sometimes you see thousands and thousands of them flying around and making these murmurations where they're turning really fast and putting on a big show. And then when you have them in your hand, they're just like, how do you possibly exist? You're so little and light, and how are you gonna fly thousands of miles now? There's a lot of indications that the saline lakes that the phalaropes depend on are really in big trouble because of climate change, but also because they almost uniformly have water diversions happening from them.
In 1941, the city of Los Angeles.
What really struck me as a kid was how unfair it seemed. Los Angeles was taking all of the water from the streams, and that just really seemed like something that needed to be fixed.
Ultimately, Mono Lake was saved in 1994 when the State Water Board made the decision to have the water go back to the lake. And it is one of the best protected, if not the best protected, saline lake in the world because it has a dedicated water right.
We've got challenges at Mono Lake. It's still too low. We're not at a healthy level. In fact, we're 10 years overdue at getting the lake up to the required management level, which would be 10 feet higher right here at the top of this pole.
As we've seen, the climate's changing, we're getting less snow, there's less water going to go around. We need to have that buffer. So I'm optimistic that that's going to happen because so many people are so dedicated to protecting Mono Lake.
There's a lot of magic to Mono Lake. It recruits its own advocates and its own people to speak for it and work for it. Even my daughter is doing science research here in the Mono Basin about glaciers and how climate change is changing the environment here as we work to protect Mono Lake at the same time.
Something that recently I've realized is that Mono Lake, it's an intergenerational project to protect it. It's really wonderful and amazing to have the continuity of having had my parents dedicate their lives to Mono Lake to be working here too and to be able to be part of this story.
So I'd like to stop it at that because he mentioned an intergenerational project. These people understand that this is a stewardship. It's not an immediate fix. This is a constant relationship, such as the murmuration that is nature that he mentioned. We saw the birds flying and moving, noticing that they were all interacting as one. And that's how nature really works. It doesn't work if you wipe out many species quickly, and we're seeing these effects. But the understanding of what can repair that and heal that is that we are a part of this murmuration as an intergenerational stewards of where we live. Would like to open up the floor for some discussion on Mono Lake. So please do raise your hand and let's hear from some thoughts, some good hearts, some ideas. Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us. Please share. I think we're still on mute, but we'd love to hear from you.
Here we go.
There we go.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, first
great.
I want to thank you for inviting me to this. I didn't expect to talk. I mainly just wanted to listen in, but you brought up something that I care a lot about, and you brought up Mono Lake. And prior to working for the state, I worked for an environmental nonprofit agency. And one of the things that is very unique and special about Mono Lake is that dedicated water right they referenced in the video clip. And it's the first time that the state was able to successfully apply a particular type of water right that came from old Roman law called the public trust. And the public trust, loosely defining it, is that that lake has more value to the state in its natural environment than it did for the water diversion. So when I began working on the Salton Sea, I looked into that because I thought, hey, Mono Lake, like this is a really beautiful, unique place. It supports wildlife. There's similar challenges, like you've mentioned. And thinking about the Salton Sea and our discussion today is there's certain things that pop up that are just these lingering challenges of just our conversation, right? And one of them is how the Salton Sea was formed. And it just pops up randomly in all sorts of venues where it's a challenge to get funding, to get laws applied. And at the Salton Sea, the challenge is whether or not the sea is viewed as a lake that would have existed in its natural state or if it's man-made. So I just wanted to flag that that's kind of a unique nuance between these two stories and how that law can be applied. And depending on which water attorney you talk to, whether or not it's applicable in this setting. But anyways, I don't really want to interject myself too much. So I just wanted to listen in today.
Yeah,
but you brought up something that I just really like and I looked into it.
Thank you for sharing. And that's a great perspective. You know, what has set a precedence before to keep things alive? You know, ultimately, it's about keeping as much as we can alive, isn't it? You know, there's resources arguments, there's there's a lot of different political issues that go into the maintaining of any sort of water body. But after altering so much in the planet, it is our job to be stewards. So it is our job to keep as much as we can alive. And is it going to be perfect? No, it's going to be kind of weird. But we've changed things so much, we need to manage these things like a fish tank. So let's be good fish owners. Hey, Tom, please share, good sir. There we go.
Okay, I'm muted now. Great. I'd like to respond to Evan Wilhoff's very on-the-point comment. The key thing that is making Mono Lake a partial success story is that the State Water Board defined an elevation level and said that this is the elevation that it should get to in order for it to be a restored lake. And the program is roughly halfway to that level from where the lowest point was. It's, as you saw in that video, it's got about another 10 feet or more to go until it's at that defined level. And so we're going to have to see, we got some decent, the lake came up a couple of feet in the last year because of the heavy rains and snow, but it's going to need continuation of that. And the reason that did work is partly because of, as Evan Wilhoff mentioned, the public trust doctrine, and because Mono Lake has been accepted to have been an existing lake for a long time. Native American population there using it for a couple of thousand years or more. Actually, the same is true of the Salton Sea. It's just not truthfully recognized as the long-standing water body that it really is. So this concept that has been promoted over and over again in the media, that the Salton Sea first came into existence in 1905, 1906, and that there was nothing there before, and it's therefore an accidental lake, is the huge challenge to defining the Salton Sea as coming under the public trust doctrine. In fact, the State Water Board in an earlier decision denied the Salton Sea as a public trust because of the false understanding right there in the State Water Board's findings that the Salton Sea did not exist before. In fact, the Salton Sea Basin has been full of water more often than not for many thousands of years. You go back a million years, it was the northern end of the Sea of Cortez. Colorado River kind of filled in the middle, the sort of high point between in the northern Mexicali Valley, where you have about 40 feet above sea level is the sort of where the Salton Sea was cut off from ocean water. But since then, the Colorado River has periodically flowed north and periodically flowed south. The Colorado River floods every several years in the past, and it would flow north and fill the entire Salton Sea Basin with what we call ancient Lake Cahuilla, and it was full of that water more often than not over thousands of years. And then other times it would flow south straight to the Sea of Cortez. So it really has been a body full of water most of the time. And there was an aquatic ecosystem in the area between the estuary entering the Sea of Cortez and or the ancient Lake Cahuilla for many, many thousands of years. And that myth that the Salton Sea is an artificial lake is what needs to be overturned. And the truth needs to be shown in order for the public trust doctrine to be applied to the Salton Sea and give this ecosystem, the Salton Sea ecosystem where I am now, a right to exist and a right to be sustained. So I thank Evan Wilhoff for her on-the-point comments, and we need to overcome the myth in order to apply the public trust doctrine. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And this could be something that we could revisit, is enough scientific evidence with some sort of co-sponsored letter by educated people with ... at the end of their name that says, hey, we've studied that this has been here. We need to change the classification so we can keep anything alive here. And that's an avenue we can take. We're going to hop to one more lake quickly for a lesson, and this is Walker Lake. And you might like a little bit of what's going on here. So this is Walker Lake in Nevada. We'll hop over the Sierras pretty close. And as you can see, it's a similar size to Mono Lake. And it's all in the same general area that used to have a lot more water. So we'll do a brief video on Walker Lake.
Snowmelt and recent rains not only raise water levels, but also rejuvenate communities surrounding lakes and rivers. A prime example is Walker Lake, located south of Reno in Mineral County, where the increased water potential brings new opportunities for the town of Hawthorne. Hawthorne's Recreation and Community Development Director, Kyle Isom, expresses gratitude for the abundant winter, stating that it offers a chance to save Hawthorne and Walker Lake. Over the years, Walker Lake has experienced a drastic drop in water levels, losing 90% of its volume due to upstream diversions for agriculture. This decline has had a detrimental impact on the lake's ecosystem, leading to the disappearance of fish and a decline in bird populations. However, a positive change is occurring as the Walker River flows into the lake for the second time in a decade. With each rising water level, community morale in Mineral County is bolstered. The Walker River Paiute tribe, who owns the northern end of the river, emphasizes the cultural and environmental significance of water for their indigenous people. The return of water symbolizes life and identity for the tribe. Already, Walker Lake has seen a 7-foot increase in water levels this spring, bringing beauty and hope to the region. The expected rise of at least 15 feet by fall holds promise for the return of fish and various recreational activities. This revival will breathe life back into the small communities surrounding the lake, fostering a sense of renewal and prosperity. As Walker Lake undergoes a transformation, it serves as a testament to the resilience and interconnectedness of nature and communities. The rising water levels offer not only environmental restoration, but also a revival of spirit for those who have longed to see their beloved lake thrive once again.
So a couple more things on what has happened with Walker Lake recently. There was a lot of change for Walker Lake in the 20th century. In the early 1900s, there were extensive water diversions from the Walker River, which sounds familiar. By the 1990s, it lost half of its water volume from the century prior. That led to a sharp increase in salinity, making the waters unlivable for most things. The once abundant Lahontan cutthroat trout almost faced extinction. But the early 2000s marked a turning point, restoring the lake in a way supported by the Walker Basin Conservancy in 2014, with funds from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and collaboration with federal and state agencies. They worked to restore the lake. This encompassed acquiring water rights, promoting sustainable agricultural practices, and enhancing the river's flow. In 2006, those Lahontan cutthroat trout were released back into the lake, a great step towards restoration. And so we could see that it takes organizations, it takes communities, it takes these types of conversations to be had. We can't expect the government to do it all. I've been offended by some of the actions of the government's negligence over the last 12 years, 13 years that I've worked in this this Salton sea loving project. And what we can do, though, is look to precedents and look to repeating some of the things that have worked in other places. So we have just a couple more minutes. At our next one of these, I would like to have time be a little bit longer so we have more constructive conversations, because some fantastic people have showed up. We're really grateful that you're here. There's one idea that I heard Mr. Sefton share pretty recently about supporting some water sustainability at the Salton Sea. So if we have 2 or 3 minutes with that, that might be an interesting idea. And then we'd love to have you come back for another one. I'm going to put our email address and our website in the chat. If you want to visit, come say hi. We'll do our best to get back to you. We are volunteer led. So if we're slow, we're sorry. We need some help, but so does the whole Salton Sea. We love doing what we're doing and we appreciate you. Tom, you had a perspective shared about banking some water, about agricultural water rights not having to be given away for Salton Sea. Can you share a little bit more about that for just a moment?
Great, thanks for the unmute. Sure, I don't want to cut anybody else off if somebody else has something to say, but the thought being at the Salton Sea that there is substantial underrun these days of over 200,000 acre feet per year, water that IID is not taking in because the agriculture has become more efficient over the last 20 years. And right now, that water essentially that never comes to the region, even though it's part of the water right for the farms in the region. That water goes to Metropolitan Water District for free. And one suggestion that has been discussed with some local farmers and is in discussion with the Imperial Irrigation District is that water really is conserved water and should be redefined as conserved water and should be part of the right to water for the region, and that water could be in the short term, while the Colorado River is under incredible stress, could be stored in the river to maintain elevation. And in a little bit longer term, if those elevation issues become less critical, that water could be assigned by using the concept of a public trust doctrine, that water should be defined as conserved water that could be made available for Salton Sea restoration. So IID is currently being educated by a local farmer on this concept, Craig Elmore, and I think that is a thought that we could take forward and have some other even larger scale ideas that I won't get into today, but we don't necessarily expect that the state is going to take care of the Salton Sea, anything more than fairly small scale projects, because part of the doctrine at the state is to essentially declare the Salton Sea as a lake that should not exist. And in order to go in a different direction, we have to look for ways to restore the Salton Sea that do not depend entirely on state coming in and saving the day, because in truth, it won't in a major way. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. So there are some ideas set by precedents that could help us out here, and it would take organizing, but there are enough people that care and that know that it's time to have some significant action, so why not? I'd like to conclude the meeting today because we set just an hour for this one. So if it's brief, please go for it, but we'll conclude shortly after that. And we'd love to have more of these. We have different topics that we could work on in education and bringing people together. We really appreciate you for coming. We'll have one more comment by Yvonne Wilhoff. And I'm going to leave a couple links in the chat. And I also thank Tony Valamontes for sharing the book with us. We look forward to learning more about that. I'm going to leave a link for that to check it out too, because it sounds like some inspiring work. So Yvonne?
Quick question for Tom, just so I understand it better. When you're referring to the water that could be used for Salton Sea restoration, is that coming from a river? Is that the New River water and Metropolitan's allocation? Or was it somewhere else? I just wanted to understand it. I wasn't sure if I caught the source of water. And Craig Elmore's example on what we could do.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the water would be Colorado River water, and it would be part of the existing IID allocation, which really is not. IID is the steward of that, but it really belongs to the farms in the Imperial Valley that have larger and smaller water needs year by year, but it has been on a declining path of water requirement partly because of the water transfers to the Los Angeles, San Diego, and Coachella Valley. But there even over and above that, there have been savings in water use by local farmers. And the concept is that existing right to water could be transitioned in times of non-crisis to supply restoration water on a long-term basis for the Salton Sea. And we hope that a legal basis can be worked out to define it that way. And I think it would be a significant benefit because a couple of 100,000 acre feet, in fact, more than that in this year's underrun, would be significant. That's roughly similar to what the IID is being asked to additionally cut for the Colorado River crisis that is current. And we've recognized that there is a need on the Colorado River to sustain elevation in Lake Mead in order not to lose the river system. But we would like to see that an opportunity over the long term to have some of that water applied to the Salton Sea. And it should be noted that the reason the Salton Sea doesn't get natural flow is because we've dammed the Colorado River in the 20th century, and therefore the flood flows that used to sustain the Salton Sea Basin never get here. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much. And it could sound like a small amount of water in the grand scheme of things, but for keeping large areas of playa covered and habitat along the playa, that is a massive amount of water. And species conservation habitat, the largest project actually under construction at the Salton Sea of 4,000 to 5,000 acres, depending on what they completely finish, doesn't have a dedicated water right. And Imperial Irrigation District has said it gets what it gets. Well, if it keeps getting drier, it dies. And like we've heard today, what has kept things alive is a dedicated water right. So if we find a way to do that, we'll keep a lot more alive. And we encourage us to find a way to get a dedicated water right on certain amounts of water, not everything, but enough to keep some things alive out here. And that we can do. We thank you so much for coming today. We will have more of these. We want to encourage ways to have more collaboration. So if you think of ways that this is going to open up that ability, please let us know. We want to act as a forum for comfortable, open, unhindered discussions about what can we do to keep things alive. And that's what we've been working on at the Salton Sea as an organization for 13 years. And we'll keep giving it our best. We thank you so much for joining and hope to see you again soon. And my guilty pleasure is getting everyone to say Save Our Sea. So I'm going to try to unmute you all if I can. And then it's just fun if people say Save Our Sea. So this will take just a second because there we go. Okay, so I think I've asked anyone who wants to unmute, and we like to say Save Our Sea. And so on 3, if you want to go for it, if not, that's cool, but we like that. Ready, 1, 2, 3. Save our sea!
Save our sea!
Save our sea!
Save our
sea! Hey, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon.